What's up, ladies and gentlemen? So, welcome to a new video, and probably the first in maybe 3 or 4 I'm going to do that are based on some of the questions specifically that you guys have asked when Gemma Atkinson and I have done our lives on Instagram. Now, they were very, very popular. We've found that so many of you, tens of thousands of you, have taken huge amounts of value from the kind of stuff we discussed in those chats. But obviously, you want a better reference point, a more concentrated reference point on certain subjects. Now, today I'm going to discuss PCOS, and rather than going into loads of extra bits that you maybe don't want to know, what we have done, we've asked for a few questions from you specifically about what you think you need to know and the information you don't necessarily have. I'm going to put everything down in this video, elaborate on some subjects, give you a little bit of relevant information that you need. But if you want a pen and paper, get hold of that if you want to make notes, or alternatively, you can play this video back, refer to certain parts. Your choice how you do it. So, first off, what is PCOS? PCOS is as a result of a hormonal imbalance which can overstimulate luteinizing hormone, which can actually prevent the body from allowing the eggs to mature and release. Now, when that happens, usually if an egg hasn't matured and released, it will then dissolve as part of the normal reproductive cycle. There's no issues. Now, sometimes, and we're not entirely sure why, the egg doesn't dissolve, and it can then become a fluid-filled sac or a cyst, hence the term polycystic ovaries. That can cause pain, inflammation, and all sorts of other problems. Essentially, that's what it is. Now, why it happens, there's multiple theories. There seems to be a very definite connection between insulin resistance and PCOS, stress and PCOS. So these are things that we want to try and get control of. And in this video, I'm going to discuss some tools on how to do that, how to work your nutrition, how to work your diet, and supplementation to make sure that happens. So, if needs be, grab a pen and paper now, pause it if necessary, and then we'll get into it with your questions. Okay, so the first and most common question we get asked with regards to PCOS is, what supplements should you be taking? Now, the first thing I'm going to say here, and this is important to remember, is that supplements should not be the first choice. Your diet should be the first choice. Fixing everything else and then using supplements to plug the gaps, or specialist supplements to do specialist jobs, that should be the goal. Do not get an over-reliance on supplements and think that by taking them, everything is magically going to happen even if you haven't attacked your diet. Get the diet right, supplements go on top, okay? Now, as previously mentioned, there seems to be a big, strong connection between PCOS and systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, and stress. And believe it or not, all 3 of those are connected themselves anyway, so without managing one, you're going to struggle to manage the others. This means that the supplements that we take should be geared towards managing stress, managing inflammation, managing insulin resistance. So, one of the most popular supplements that you'll hear me talk about all of the time, because it really is an all-singing, all-dancing supplement for both male and female, but specifically here we're talking about females, is our estro support supplement. Now, it's a detoxification supplement. It helps to remove toxic estrogens from the body, helps to regulate your hormones massively. Now, remember, PCOS is as a result of a major hormone imbalance. Taking something like estro support can help to rebalance those things, and because it takes foreign bodies out of your system that should not be there, it can hugely contribute to a reduction in inflammation, which is a major issue with PCOS. So estro support would be my #1 supplement to try and get this under wraps. Now, as I said, that's going to have a knock-on effect. If you have foreign bodies in your system, things that shouldn't be there, essentially poisons, your stress hormones are also going to go up. When your stress hormones go up, that's going to exacerbate PCOS. When your stress hormones are high, that's also cortisol and insulin have an inverse relationship. So it's also going to affect your body's insulin sensitivity. Okay, so by managing inflammation, getting the right antioxidants in your body, it's going to help you hit all 3 of those issues and start to bring them down. So estro support, #1. Now, with regards to inflammation, again, we'll stick with that. Omega-3s, omega-3 fish oil. So I like to suggest between 5 and 10 grams per day, especially with an issue like this, when you have high systemic inflammation. Omega-3 fish oil can help to bring that inflammation down, and high concentrations of DHA can actually block the inflammatory response to some degree. So omega-3 fish oil you should be taking in as well. If you are taking in plenty of oily fish during the week, drop that down to 5. If not, see if you can bump it up closer to 10. I will, of course, put links to all of these in the subject box, in the comments box below. Next up, we want to make sure we are taking in magnesium. Magnesium, again, is going to help to manage inflammation. It's also going to help you to regulate your stress massively. It's going to help you improve your sleep massively, which when you improve your sleep, again, inflammation, stress, and insulin sensitivity is all going to be positively affected. Vitamin D3, again, huge anti-inflammatory. You're seeing a pattern occur in here. It's also going to help improve insulin resistance or improve your insulin sensitivity. So again, ticking all of the boxes. And inositol, some of you ask about inositol. which is a sugar alcohol, which can, again, to some degree, help with insulin sensitivity. Again, making sure you're managing those blood sugar levels optimally. Okay, so our supplements, we want to start with estro support, magnesium, D3, omega-3, inositol. They would be a good starting point specifically for managing PCOS. So again, I will put the links to those in the description box below so you can jump on if you need to. Next question was, why is it that PCOS makes you struggle with weight loss? A few reasons, most of which we've just discussed. Because it's going to elevate inflammation, systemic inflammation, which means extra water retention, which means bloatedness, which means your digestive system maybe isn't working the way it should. Maybe you become malnourished because of that. All of these things can have an effect on your body's ability to lose fat. Your stress, because you're inflamed or because you're toxic, all these things. Stress can actually start to, when it's chronically elevated, can actually start to reduce the body's ability to burn fat regardless of what you're doing with your diet. So we need to be able to get stress under control. When these things are happening, when you're highly stressed, when you are inflamed, when things are not working the way they're supposed to, there's a good chance you're also being quite inconsistent on your diet. Whether you realize it or not, you'll be turning to certain things, maybe binge starvation cycles. You're inconsistent on your eating patterns, and possibly, therefore, by not eating right, that's making it much, much harder to drop fat. Next up, because of all of these things, again, inflammation, stress, you may not be able to sleep properly. If you can't sleep properly, never, ever, ever underestimate the effect that good quality sleep has on your body and your body's ability to change body composition, to lose fat, to build muscle. You need to prioritize sleep above so many other things because it will have a massive knock-on effect on all of the things we keep mentioning, and I'm going to keep saying them by name because you need to understand the causes: stress, inflammation, recovery, insulin sensitivity. You need to drill these things in. Sleep is going to improve all of them. Next up, why does PCOS make me struggle with weight loss? This again, you're going to hear me repeat these same three things over and over again: inflammation, insulin resistance, and stress. They are always going to put the brakes on fat loss. They're going to do their very, very best to slow everything down for you. This is why it's so important to control things. Now, if we are systemically inflamed across the whole body, that's going to result in water retention. That's going to result in potentially a diminished digestive system, an inability to recover from training, an inability to get the results you want out of the exercise you're doing. Secondly, if our digestive system, we are inflamed and things are not working there, which also comes as a result of cortisol and stress, which we'll come on to in a minute, we can't absorb our food properly, we can't digest our food properly. So even with the best will in the world and you're eating all of the right foods in the world, you're not actually taking in the nutrients you need from them, and despite everything going in your mouth, you could end up being malnourished. So it's important to understand we need to bring inflammation down and allow the body's processes, the systems, to work well, to work the way they're supposed to do. And I will just touch upon that, just in case a lot of you here are saying, Elliot, what the hell is inflammation? You keep saying it. The way to think about this is, if a bee stings you, or a wasp, let's say a wasp, because we don't like wasps, we like bees. A wasp stings you, in that area, that acute area, you see it bubbles up and it will fill with fluid, okay? That is inflammation. It's acute inflammation, but it's inflammation nonetheless. There's been an attack, there's a problem there. The body tries to protect it, so it swells up, fills it with fluid, and allows to try and protect the area, flushes nutrients to and from it. Now, systemic inflammation, if you imagine that one little bubble, that little bit of inflammation, is across your entire system, across all systems in your body, across your organs, across your skin, across your legs, your muscles, etc. Everything becomes inflamed. It's a massive, massive draw on your immune system because essentially you're one giant bee sting. That is inflammation. We need to stop that from happening. Now, it is a natural and very, very beneficial process to us, but it should not be something that is prolonged, and it should not be something that's chronic across your entire body. Okay, so inflammation we must control. Stress we must control. Again, when cortisol, our stress hormone, is high, that can play havoc with all sorts of things. It can reduce our body's ability to digest food. It reduces digestive enzyme production. It can play with our blood sugar levels, which can cause massive cravings, which can cause starvation and binge cycles and inconsistency with our diets, which, as I'm sure you can see, that would then have a negative knock-on effect to our body composition, our body's ability to burn fat, because even with the best will in the world, we're probably cheating or being inconsistent more than we should. It will also affect our sleep. If our cortisol hormones are too high, our cortisol hormone is too high rather, it could screw with our body's natural cortisol curve, and that's our ability to be awake in the morning and sleep at night and get good quality sleep. When we're not getting good quality sleep, that's going to exacerbate every problem in the body, including inflammation, including hormonal imbalances, including our appetite and cravings and need for sugar, etc., etc. So again, you see how these things are all connected. Then we move on to insulin resistance. As part of PCOS, you're going to probably suffer from some level of insulin resistance, which means you're not going to tolerate carbohydrates very well. And maybe if you're in even a small calorie surplus, or even potentially sometimes at random maintenance, you may be storing a little bit more fat as opposed to burning that glycogen as muscle fuel. So we need to manage that as well. So it's not that PCOS per se makes it hard for you to gain weight, but it can be a number of contributing factors, secondary factors, that because of PCOS, you're maybe doing other things a little bit wrong. And it's important for us to try and remove all of those things, remove inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and manage stress through sleep, proper diet, the correct amount of exercise, and recovery. So that's generally why you struggle with weight loss, but it's only a struggle, doesn't mean it's impossible. Important to understand that. Next up, we keep talking about insulin resistance, and a lot of you have asked the best time to eat carbs for insulin resistance. Now, the first thing we need to touch upon here, and I believe I touch upon it again later in these questions, is you do still need to eat carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are very beneficial for you. They are necessary. They will help to regulate your hormones, regulate your thyroid. So do not fall into the trap of thinking zero carb is the way, because if you do, and when I tell you zero carb, I mean none of the starchy carbs, things like potatoes, rice, pasta, this kind of thing. You need to manage what you have, when you have, and how much, but taking them out entirely is not necessarily the answer, certainly not in the long term. So, best carbs to eat. First thing we're going to talk about is the food types. Taking in carbohydrates is important, but low glycemic index carbohydrates for sufferers of PCOS is going to be better options. So what are low glycemic index carbs? We're talking about the kind of brown varieties of things. So rather than white bread, have a bit of brown bread. Rather than cereal, have oats, whole oats. Rather than having white potato, have sweet potato. Rather than having white basmati rice, you have brown rice, things like that. So think about your carbohydrates still need to be going in, yes, but you also need to be making the right choices. So don't deprive yourself of carbohydrates entirely. That's point number one, because if you do, you will relapse, and instead of reaching for the good ones, you're going to reach for the bad ones, and your condition will worsen. You're never going to get past it and break the habit. Secondly, timing. Timing is very, very important with your carbohydrates because, as mentioned previously, we're trying to help manage insulin sensitivity. Now, your body is going to deplete glycogen when you weight train, when you perform physical activity, higher intensity physical activity with heavier weights, especially. So, after weight training sessions, and we're not talking about cardio sessions, which you're not really going to be burning much glycogen, weight training sessions are going to burn a lot of glycogen, which is why they're so effective for improving insulin resistance or improving your insulin sensitivity. Have your carbohydrates low GI after your training sessions, within an hour or so. That's when your body is going to use those carbohydrates as they go in. It's going to say, right, well, I've just emptied my muscle cells of glucose. I'm going to put all of the carbohydrates back into the muscle. I'm not going to store any of it as fat. Okay? Now, this does mean that for anyone out there with PCOS, you should be weight training. You should be weight training. If you want to manage your condition, you should be weight training. And don't worry, it's not going to make you big. Next up, if you are not training, let's say on your rest days, for example, you want to be trying to have your carbohydrates later in the day. Again, sticking with low GI, but what that's going to do is it's going to help you sleep. It's going to help give you a nice relaxing night's sleep because you've elevated serotonin with carbohydrates before bed. When you're sleeping better, stress hormones lower, insulin sensitivity improves, all of these things that we're always trying to improve with PCOS get better. So, carbohydrates, low GI choices, either immediately after weight training sessions, and you should be weight training, or before bed, and the leaner you get, the more carbohydrates essentially you should be having. And you can even, when you get very lean, start to change the type of carbohydrates you're having because your condition has improved. So that should answer the thing on carbs. Do not avoid them. Just make sure you're having the right types in the right amount and they are controlled at the right times. Next up, should I be doing more cardio or resistance training in order to improve my PCOS? Definitely resistance training. As I've just mentioned, essentially what is happening when you resistance train, our muscle cells, our main fuel for our muscle cells is glycogen, which comes from glucose, which comes from carbohydrates. So we have a muscle cell here, it's full of glycogen. Think of it like a fuel tank in a car. When we weight train, that fuel level drops because we're using it. Eventually the muscle cell is empty. Okay, now I can't run on empty, just like you can't run your car on empty. We have to refuel, we have to go to the gas station. In the case of glycogen, glucose, carbohydrates, the gas station is your food. You eat carbohydrates, the body processes that, digests it, turns it into glucose, then it gets converted into glycogen, then that gets put into the muscle cell. If the muscle cell is empty, it will be sensitive to the key that is insulin if the muscle cell is empty, and that's what insulin sensitivity means. If all of your muscle cells are constantly full of carbohydrates because you eat too many, insulin is released by the pancreas, it comes along to the muscle cell, tries to unlock it, and it says, nah, you're not coming in, we're full, you can't come in today. And the insulin goes, okay, fine, bam, runs around, you end up with loads of circulating insulin, bring on diabetes further down the line, okay? So, we need to empty the muscle cell of fuel regularly in order to put some back in. And if we're not putting it back in, what the body then does is it takes fat stores, your stored fat, takes that down into the liver, processes it, turns that into glycogen, and then releases that and puts it in. So that's why when you weight train, you're going to burn fat a lot faster than if you do cardio, for example. So your primary effort when it comes to training and being in the gym with PCOS should be weight training. Now, that means slower, heavier, progressive weight training. It does not mean high intensity interval training, HIIT training, Joe Wicks style things every single day. That is a bad idea because over time that's going to elevate stress, massively increases inflammation, which by now, I've said it a million times, you should know that is a bad thing for PCOS. So we want slower, progressive, programmed weight training in order to empty those muscle cells of glycogen to allow space for more carbohydrates to come in or fat burning to occur. So weight training is the primary. Cardiovascular training is always going to help. It's going to help you to improve insulin sensitivity to some degree on top of your weight training. It's going to help you to improve nutrient delivery because your blood flow is better, your cardio system is far, far better. So add it, but what I tend to suggest is, if you can do half an hour walk a day, maybe a little bit of cardio, like interval sessions or something like 2 or 3 times a week, that's fine. Aim for, if you're sitting there saying, yeah, Elliot, be a bit more specific. I'm going to say to you 4 weight training sessions a week, full body, 2 steady cardio sessions, maybe 30 minutes on a bike or a 30-minute walk per day, something like that. Really, really simple. Weight training comes first. Cardio should be supplementary if you want to do it and if you need to do it. Next up, Elliot, what's the best time of day to train with PCOS? Does not matter at all. Doesn't matter at all. There's a few things, I get asked this question a lot, not necessarily even just relevant to PCOS, but you should be training when you feel best to train, when you know it's most appropriate for you to train. Now, there's going to be a few factors in this. So I'll discuss myself personally. I like to train first thing in the morning if I can. The reason being is that my days can be extremely busy, extremely long, and quite random at times, which means if I don't get to train in the morning, I may not get to train at all because I can be working until 11 o'clock at night. I can get pulled away left, right, and center, which means for me, I get up in the morning, I want to get my little bits done first thing, and then I want to train as early as possible because then I know it's done. And for many of you out there, if you're training first thing in the morning before work, something like that, a few other things are going to happen. Number one, if you know you have to get up early to train first thing, you're probably going to go to sleep earlier and your sleep patterns improve. Number two, the first thing you do in your day is positive, and that has a big knock-on effect to everything in the rest of your day. 3, by the time you get to work or get to your job, you've already trained, you've got it done, you've got fresh blood pumping around your body, pumping around your brain, you're hyper productive by the time you get to work, everybody else is just waking up, you're already sorted. Even if you have a bad day, you get halfway through your day, to the end of your day, you're absolutely exhausted, there's no way you're going to have the energy to train, you've already done it. It doesn't matter. Go home and relax. And also on that, a lot of people say, I don't have time, I need to spend time with my family, with my kids, etc. Yeah, but if you're training first thing in the morning, you've still got from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock at home with your family. It's all there. You're not disturbing it with 2 hours back and forth to the gym. So for me, morning training generally is best, but ultimately you may find that you're a little bit depleted. You don't have the energy in the morning. Maybe the schedule doesn't suit. Maybe you want to train at lunchtime when you've got a little bit of food in you. Cool, not a problem. Maybe you want to train after work when you've got more food in you. Cool, not a problem. The only thing I would say, is don't train too late at night. If you train too late at night, you're going to overstimulate the release of cortisol. It's going to disturb your sleep patterns. When you disturb your sleep patterns, again, everything starts to fall apart. So I would say the earlier in the day you can train, the better, but ultimately find something that works for you and then do it consistently. Because if you set yourself an unrealistic goal, you're not going to be able to keep ticking that box, and that's when things start to fall apart. Consistency trumps everything. So best time of day to train, whenever you want. Is fruit a no-go? This is a common one with PCOS, and I'm not sure what it comes from. I think, maybe a misunderstanding between carbohydrates and fruit and how they interact with the body. Ultimately, no, fruit is not a no-go. What I would say, again, bearing in mind our three main goals are to manage stress, manage inflammation, and manage insulin resistance, is that we want to take in foods high in antioxidants to help that path. So berries, dark berries, things with thin skins with naturally high antioxidant content is going to be good. How much per day? Probably a couple of handfuls per day is going to be adequate for the majority of you. So don't avoid fruit. Enjoy fruit, especially throwing it on other meals to make them more interesting. Just if you can, generally, for most people, it's the same. Stick to berries, things with higher antioxidant contents to really get the most out of it. And of course, you should be taking in an awful lot of vegetables day to day because they're going to help to manage everything, insulin sensitivity, blood sugar elevations, things like that. Fewer calories for people with PCOS. Should you be eating less calories? No, not at all. Not at all, not at all, not at all. Unless you have some major underlying thyroid issue, which again needs to be addressed rather than just avoiding calories. No, you should still be able to eat an adequate amount of calories. And one of the common things that occurs with females especially, and could also, there is some evidence to suggest it might have some relevance to how PCOS develops, and the GnRH, that gonadotropin releasing hormone, that can be disrupted based on constant starvation and binge cycles. So there is a possibility that over time, if you've been through starvation and binge cycles, you've done every crazy diet in the world, you've done fasts, you've done juices, you've done soups, you've done all this stuff, that this could have contributed to the current situation. So we want to try and get out of that. Now, one of the things that I've always tried to teach clients, what I teach clients on my online programs, is that it's not about starving yourself. Dieting is about teaching the body to optimize every process it has. Maximize health, maximize strength, maximize performance. And instead of thinking, right, I'm going to starve myself into a calorie deficit, what you should be thinking is, I'm going to teach my body to burn so many calories while it's resting that I end up in a calorie deficit anyway. That's the goal. That's my goal for clients. That's my goal for getting people to the shape they want to be and allowing them to sustain that lifestyle for the rest of their life. So it's not about starving yourself. It's not about reducing calories dramatically. Yes, of course, you have to find a balance, but you may need some help with that. If so, give me a shout, drop a comment in the box below. What I would suggest for the majority of you is to track your calories for a week to see where you are. If your average calories over the week seem pretty low, we're talking, probably sub 1,500 for a female, then there could be an issue. You're probably going to need to want to go up. Now, you can go lower than that for short periods of time with intermittent bursts out of it, refeeds, things like that. But if you track your calories and you're eating less than 1,500 calories per day consistently, then you're probably not eating enough, and this could be causing problems with especially stress and not allowing you to manage your PCOS as well as you should, okay? Now, with that, you're going to ask me, yeah, but then how do I set up my diet? If we're looking at the diet for PCOS, or generally, but we'll keep it specific to this particular video, we want to be establishing a baseline of protein. Now, for me, I find the majority of females are going to work off of about 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you start your diet, let's say 90 to 100 grams of protein per day, from animal sources ideally. It gets a bit more difficult if you're a vegan or vegetarian, but animal sources ideally, that's your baseline. So I'm saying I'm going to eat between 90 and 100 grams of protein per day. Bam, done. Now, the rest of your calories, based on how much you're eating and whether you need it to go up or down, should be split predominantly with PCOS, with fats being much, much higher than carbohydrates. Fats need to be much higher than carbohydrates to help retain your hormonal balance, but also remember, because excessive carbohydrate intake can result in diminished insulin sensitivity, therefore exacerbating the problem we have with PCOS. So carbohydrates do need to be managed. Now, how do we then identify that? Again, I'm just going to throw some numbers at you just to give you a ballpark, and it's important to understand it's a ballpark. We've established we're going to eat 90 to 100 grams of protein per day, and that's by content, not per weight. As a suggestion, what I suggest you do with your carbohydrate intake, and this is from starchy carbohydrates, don't count your vegetables and fruit in this, have about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So if you weigh 65 kilos, have 65 grams of carbohydrates by content from starchy carbs, low GI carbs like sweet potato, or brown rice per day. Start with that, and the remainder of your calories should be fats, things like avocados, nuts, oils, pesto, etc. Start with about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per day. If that feels good and you're getting good results, everything feels right, amazing, bump that up to 1.5 when everything's feeling good. If that's great, bump it up to 2 and hover somewhere around there. That should be adequate. Now, if getting leaner is your goal, rather than just managing PCOS, the leaner you get, you're going to be better off moving into a carb cycle. But I've done some videos on that previously, which you can check out. And that's just fluctuating your carbohydrate intake based on whether you're doing weight training or whether you're not weight training or doing cardio. And then you can adjust that, but that's something for another video. So generally, work out the calories you want to be eating based on tracking. If it's lower than 1500, you may want to go up or at least maintain consistently. What I would say for most females, you want to be between 90 and 100 grams of protein. Much more could cause more inflammation if you already have an underlying condition, so you may not want to do that. Establish a baseline of about 1 to 1.5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight, and then the remainder of the calories you set for yourself should go in fats. Try that, see how it goes, and adjust from there. Now, foods to avoid. You probably picked it up from here. High glycemic index carbs, shit carbs, bad carbs, the ones you know. We're talking about white bread, pasta, cake, sweets, chocolate, alcohol, anything that's gonna negatively affect your insulin levels or inflammation. Very simple. I think really the majority of you know the answer to this. You just have to be told it, and this is me telling you it. Avoid high glycemic index carbs, cereals, things like, you know, a real common one that I see amongst females so often is things like acai bowls and granola. Now, yes, they are full of nutrients, but realistically, these things are some of the most insanely over-the-top unhealthy dietary choices, not because of the nutrients, because of the sheer amount of calories and sugar in these things. So things like acai bowls, things like cereals, stay away from them. Opt for brown, low GI versions of your foods like brown rice, sweet potato, things like that. It's going to be far, far better off doing that than you are going for the more concentrated carbohydrate sources. Get things under control. The better you get things under control over time, the more freedom you're going to be able to have with your diet later down the line. Put the work in now in order to get more out later. That's really, really, really important. So that's pretty much the questions that keep getting thrown at us. And in summary, supplementation, go right back to the very beginning of this video with regards to what are the most recommended supplements for something like PCOS and how to manage it. It's all about managing 3 main things. Number 1, manage your inflammation, systemic inflammation. This means not taking any shit food in. It means supplementing with things like magnesium, vitamin D3, omega-3, estro support. Manage your insulin sensitivity, so your body's ability to deal with carbohydrates. This means weight training is going to be key, but slower, more controlled, progressive weight training, not loads and loads of HIIT. You need to recover. So weight train maybe 4 times per week, alternating days, for example, and then maybe add a couple of 30-minute cardio or HIIT sessions in there. Do not make your workouts primarily HIIT. That would be a big mistake. Got to also manage stress. Now, some of that is going to be training recovery. Some of that is going to be managing the antioxidants, as we've mentioned, getting the toxins out of your body. Some of it is going to be sleep. We've given you all of the tools to manage that as well. So if you can get those 3 things under control, you can get your inflammation down, you can manage your sleep and therefore stress, and you can manage your insulin sensitivity. It's not going to necessarily cure PCOS. If it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. But what it can do is make it much, much, much easier to handle and live with, and also really positively affect your body composition. So give it a go. If you have any more questions, pop them in the comments box below or tap me up on Instagram at Elliot Upton. Look out for me and Gemma doing more lives. We will always try and tag them on. I'm going to do more of these types of videos on endometriosis, menstrual cycle, menopause, etc. So feel free to keep an eye on our profiles for when we put out questions to drag them in. Now, this has stretched out. I do love to waffle, but hopefully it's been of some use to you, and you can go back, watch it again and again and again, pick out the points you need, create a training plan for yourself and a dietary plan, or at the very least, take some tips from it in order to then maximize the results from your training and the way you manage your diet. Good luck.